I was fortunate to be the chief of police here at the university for about a dozen years, and one day I walked into the office and I got there early enough to listen to the day shift roll call briefing. I wanted to see what was going on. I'd like to show up when I could. And I was listening to the sergeant talk about all the stuff that had to be ready for that day, and there was a lot of really good information that he was kind of sharing. And I remember saying to him, how did we know that? Like, where did that come from? Because it's really good information. He said, Chief, you gotta talk to Diane on the midnight shift because she knows. So I stayed up all day and into the night time when police chiefs become bats because I used to be up that late. And I went into the dispatch, they got situated, and I went in and sat down with Diane, and I said, how do we know this? And she said, this is really interesting. I go on these electronic bulletin boards and I find all this stuff that's being shared publicly. And I said, is it wide open? I mean, with an electronic bulletin board. The only bulletin board I knew were the ones when I was in college, you could stick a note to the board in the student center and figure out if we get a ride home, that kind of thing, right? She found all kinds of things. And then she said, I go to this thing called Facebook. I'm like, what's a Facebook? And she goes, well, it's this new thing that just came out. You have to have a .edu email address to join it, for those who have been around long enough to remember that. And then she said, I find all kinds of things. And we were finding things like students who were bragging about rapes they'd committed the night before. I mean, and I would say there's nobody that would actually put that on. Like, nobody would actually do that, post it. I mean, she said, oh no, here it is. And we were making arrests and judicial cases, and things were being shared. And I realized at that moment it was changing. We started with, in our, we started, and again, I'll kind of date myself, and for some of you that have been around long enough, remember when residence halls had phones in the residence hall rooms? Remember that novel idea where there was actually a phone plugged in the wall? Remember residence hall rooms before they had a cable TV outlet and an internet jack in them? That's where you had a box room and you had a bed and a desk, and that's where you lived, and then you went to the library to study, like that. Students stopped using their phones. They stopped using their university email accounts, right? That was a heck of a problem. Nobody was using their email accounts. The university gave them, right? So we couldn't communicate effectively. Students were moving their conversation into this new space. So let me stop there and kind of move forward a little bit. So I have now I have a 13 and a 14-year-old, but a couple years ago, when my kids first got, they started with an iPod. You couldn't. I denied them technology for as long as I could before it was socially impairing them with all of their friends and who had what. Right? It's an interesting conversation for those who have kids that are in that age. And so my daughter was living on her Instagram account. I mean, living on it. The stuff that she would post, it was like a whole new language. She would say things, and her voice was different. What she would say, how she would say it was different. And I remember one day I said to her, her name was Kira. I said, Kira, what is this? Like, what does that mean? And she was posting photos of herself, and I was watching who was following her Instagram, which was public. And they weren't her friends. They weren't other middle school kids. They were other people, some of whom were not age appropriate for what they were watching. And she said, well, it's public. I said, well, why do you do this? She said, Dad, are you looking at my social media? That's why I never forget that. Then at that point I said to her, which kind of jumps forward, I said, sweetheart, I'm a company that pays attention to social media. It's kind of an ironic question for you to ask. Yes, I am looking at your account, and that's what I do with your father. So I knew that the conversation in middle schools and high schools was shifting. So you got the first experience, you got that one. And then the third one was Stephen Healy, who's in the room, who I owe so much to our partnership and what we've been able to do. Stephen and I had left our universities. I was here at UVM, for those who haven't met Stephen. He was at some school in Princeton, New Jersey that I never heard of before, Princeton. And he left and his university and joined me, and I left mine and joined him. And we founded a company that was doing work all over the United States for school safety and security. Many of your universities are likely our customers. If you read about it in the paper, there's a pretty good chance that the school reached out to us to help, from Virginia Tech to Penn State and in between. And we were seeing trending across college campuses of when bad things were happening, however you define a bad thing, it had a social media component to it. And so then the question became, if I can get this to work. became, there we go. How do we pay attention to this digital conversation? Because from a campus safety and security angle, and I'm not talking necessarily about campus police or public safety alone. I'm talking about student affairs, conduct, residential life. Student affairs, residence halls, judicial counseling centers, campus safety, the conversation. So much of it was happening online. It was being shared online, and the challenge today is when... You want to wait, guys?
Yeah. I think you should be getting that. You want to try to talk?
I would love to try to talk. Would be good. Perfect. Okay, thanks. That we would need to pay attention to that. And when Diane, my dispatcher, was doing this, she was doing it one person a couple hours a night because the conversation wasn't that expansive. You could do it back then. You could scan the bulletin boards online. You could scan that stuff. The challenge today is you can't. So the digital conversation, where all of this is happening, has to be paid attention to. Part of our DNA in this culture and in our country. So the idea that we would be monitoring or being monitored doesn't play well, it doesn't sit well. So at universities in particular, students don't like to be, communities don't like to be. So the question became, how do we pay attention to all of that information in a way that respects privacy? How do we do it in a way that streamlines operations and oversight and makes it efficient? These are the questions that we're struggling with. And if it's not been any more apparent, look at the last 3 weeks. What happened in Rosebud, Oregon? A horrible tragedy. Where did that shooter talk about what he was going to do? On public social media. What happened in Philadelphia right after that? Philadelphia area colleges, for those who are from that area, were put on notice, right, that they had a social media threat that was made that they were now dealing with. When we looked and studied about 30 years worth of transition and communication on campuses, Steve and I found that social media was playing a role in almost all the major events happening on your campus. About 100%. When something happens, your students are talking about it where? Online. And we'll talk about which of those features, which of those services they're using. The important thing for us is to respect public versus private in this conversation. And so we'll unpack a little bit of that as we go. And if there are questions as we move forward in this, just please shoot up a hand and ask, and I'd love that dialogue. I've only got about 8 hours worth of slides, so I think I can fit some of that in. We'll be up just in time for dinner. This is about threat intelligence. Universities and colleges have recognized, and we'll show the statistics in the recent surveys that were done on campus, that this has to really be about threat intelligence and not about monitoring. Universities don't safety and security angle, how many people like their Starbucks coffee in the morning? Frankly, I don't need to see another picture of a sushi boat from lunch posted on an Instagram account. I don't understand the food postings. Still don't quite get that. This is about when bad things are happening or something's being shared, how do we get that information? A couple weeks ago, there was a shooting at MIT, right on the campus, right around the campus. When that shooting happened, the pictures from the moments afterwards began to show up on Instagram and Twitter. Students, it's habit. You reach out, you take out your device, you snap a photo, you post it. You get a video, you post it. That's what we're all doing that. There was a time when we didn't have video cameras in our pockets, but now that we do, everything is chronicled. And in fact, what's happening with social media is, and I find this incredibly fascinating, we've shifted from text-based social media, which is really what things like Facebook started with. You'd post a written message, to image-based social media, the rise of Instagram, to video-based social media, which is coming next, Periscope and Meerkat. It's the future of social media. It's the next generation of what we're seeing, where you're actually able to get your phone and capture a live streaming event to social media right from your phone. It's going to change the way we look at this. So when Stephen and I saw this trending begin to happen, we realized that schools needed help to figure this out. So we launched a second company, and that's kind of where I landed. Stephen still manages and operates Margolis Healy, of which the National Center's a part of, and that's right down the street. And we launched a second company called Social Sentinel, and now I run that company with offices here in Vermont and in Austin and in Texas and California. And we help schools with automated processes to look at this information, to be able to gather it in a way that's efficient and effective. If I put on the screen the news clips of what we get every day on what happens on social media, I couldn't keep up with it. We'd be here all day flipping through the news channels, right? In the K-12 space, it's all about cyberbullying. It's all about, that's where that's playing, and drugs, some drug work, drug stuff that's happening. In colleges, it's about suicide and depression, some criminal activity, and flash organization. We should. This is a story from the New York Times on April 20th of this year. And it was a story that ran about the Keene Pumpkin Festival in Keene, New Hampshire. For anyone here in the Northeast or possibly from New Hampshire may remember, the school shut it down. This is actually a photo of spring break in Panama City Beach, Florida. That's what the New York Times ran a picture of. Both instances had an example of social media was used to gather the crowd. And it happened fast. It used to be, the RA, remember this is where you date yourself. It used to be the RA in the residence hall would hear the whisperings of a party. And they say, it's all gonna happen on the 5th floor of blah, blah, blah. It's coming. I heard someone's getting, and then we coordinate. Forget about those days. Those are long gone. The RAs don't know any more than, well, they may, but they usually any more do. Because how are they being organized now? From a handheld device that every student has, where they're posting, the party is here, this is happening there. All of the information is being disseminated from the palm of a hand with a few text strokes. So in this case, the party, the Keene Pumpkin Festival got so big, so fast because of social media, they shut it down. Countless examples from universities across the country showing this. Out of control, the size of, why is that important? Well, it plays importance for a residence hall, if it's a residence hall, because student affairs staff are now dealing with that kind of growth, explosive growth. That puts a strain on their resources. Campus public safety have to deal with it the way they need to deal with it. It trickles through the system. So what's popular? Social media is moving in ebbs and flows. New things come up, other things die off. The cooler it gets for us, the less cool it gets for our students, is the way that seems to play out, right? Twitter, LinkedIn, Google+, Facebook, Flickr, Tumblr, Pinterest, which is the largest social media for women. That's trending. Instagram, video, YouTube, Meetup, and Reddit. This doesn't include the social media related sites like Craigslist and others that share information that college students, and we're still using. But in terms of the most popular right now, these are what's trending in the world. Periscope and Meerkat, you'll see pop up shortly. Twitter knew Periscope was the future of video live streaming, and they bought it. So there's social media. Facebook bought Instagram because Facebook knew and saw the trending that Instagram, image-based, was going to need to augment its text-based. And as you've seen over the last several years, Facebook has grown in its ability to post videos and photos and that kind of thing, right? It's changing. Most of our students are not on Facebook. That's not who's using it. Who's using it? Us. I mean, this is we're using it. They're not using it. My daughter, we celebrated her bat mitzvah this weekend, and she posted. We had all these photos, and I said, "Did you put them on? Did you put them on Facebook?" And I got rid of my Facebook account. Why? Because nobody uses Facebook. I'm like, I use Facebook. She goes, well, then you use it, but the rest of them don't. I'm like, what does that mean, right? Where did she put the photos? Instagram. They're all over her Instagram account, is the way that goes, right? The Pew Research Center did a study in 2014 and 15 that showed 70% of Americans who use a computer are online. It's pretty impressive, 7 out of 10. Facebook hit the mark about a month ago, 1 billion users. That's 1 in 7 people on the planet, I think they said, use Facebook. Unbelievable, right? Instagram, which they own, hit 400 million users that Monday. 400 million users that Monday. And social media is growing most prevalently amongst us, older than the 12 to 25s. That's who's growing in the use of social media. When we look at the statistics of who's using what, 12 to 25-year-olds, of which encompass high school and college. And of course, we have to pay attention to the high school because they're becoming who? College students, right? It's like, I always said as a police chief at the university, it was like educating a parade. You know, you got them educated on what you thought they understood about safety on campus, and then they turn the corner and a quarter of them leave and a new quarter comes on and you gotta do it all over again, right? This process, social media, who's using it, 12 to 25, Instagram is trending up. Twitter is trending up. Facebook is trending down for college students. So when I get asked from university administrators, what do we need to pay most attention to? The starting point is Instagram and Twitter, because that's who your students are using. If they're using it now, what about for faculty and staff? Well, then it's Facebook, if that's the area of concern that you need to pay attention to or thinking about, right? Another piece of information, this is the 2014 to 2015, the spring. Again, what we saw here is Instagram trending up, Twitter still capturing 24 to 27%, Facebook dropping, and then the rest falling underneath.
Like
Yik Yak is so interesting. Yik Yak and Whisper and other of the anonymous social media. Yes, they're being used, and yes, they're trending. Not quite sure where they're going to end up in this mix. They're down here. Students are still using these the most, but Yik Yak and Whisper and the anonymous sources are the ones that might be causing you the most headache, right? Because of what's said and how they're dealt with, right? They are not, Yik Yak in particular is not a company that's chosen to play with other companies to help deal with that particular issue. It's fascinating to me. I don't understand, I'm still not quite getting my head wrapped around the validity of the business model. I mean, they have a service that makes people really angry at them. I mean, I'm not sure how that works exactly, right, as to what that is. But as you probably know, you all can have Yik Yak, banned from your campus, that you can go in and they can take you out of that geofence space as such. Which brings another particularly important issue up. Only 5 to 10% of social media is geolocated. Only 5 to 10%. And that's pretty conservative. The statistics even go lower than that in some places. Which means, even if you are using a based solution to pay attention to social media, you're missing 90 to 95% of the conversations happening on your campus. We've seen social media inciting gang violence on college campuses and the surrounding areas because that's the easiest way to communicate, through social media. It's the fastest, most efficient, and the codes and the words that go with that. We've seen, in terms of the third point, which is where I'm kind of focusing on the chronic mental health issue, so many of our students who are reaching out for help, who are experiencing some sort of mental health crisis or challenge, are sharing that and reaching out on social media. When we go back and look at, unfortunately, the suicides or suicide attempts, or the folks that are talking about harm and self-harm, and then when we go to the counseling centers, anyone here from a counseling center or working mental health student? No. When we speak to counseling centers, and we say, we believe that a lot of this is happening on social media, I haven't yet met a counselor yet who hasn't said to me, it's absolutely where we're seeing the trending and this stuff happening on social media. That's where our students are sharing, that's where our high school students are sharing this. And we think that with social media, and I'll go back, let's go back to cameras. Do you remember when video cameras became part of the campus safety landscape? For those who've been around long enough. You remember it was the end of the world as we know it? We've been thinking, that's it, we shred the Constitution, this is the end of everything as we know that's sacred, because we're going to have cameras everywhere, and they'll be watching everything. Today, if I step onto a college campus, Steve and I stepped onto any of your campuses, and there weren't cameras, what would our reaction most likely be as security experts for college university? You're hanging out there. Like, how could you not have cameras? Right? When we do expert witness work and it's related to campus safety, one of the first things we ask is, do you have a strategic security plan that includes video cameras? The point being is that today, that technology. Do you remember when door locks at a university were actually metal keys that had ridges on them, and you put them in and turn them and they open the door? when lock shops were really smart, tactile people who could, take a chocolate bar and a shoestring and create something important with it like MacGyver. Today, they all have computer tech degrees, and the lock shops have now become access control shops because we've almost gotten rid of everything that's got a key. I'm looking around, and even that door's got a key punch on it. I bet no one has put a key in that door ever, right? The change in access control. Many of the universities now are going to biometrics. Put your finger on it, opens. Now they're going to irises. You'd have thought when that technology came out, it was the second end of the world coming. What do you mean? They're gonna take my fingerprint? What are they gonna do? Sell it to who's gonna have my fingerprint? They can get into my bank accounts. This is the end of the world. Today, we go to universities all over the country. We walk in to get into the building, the labs, it's biometrics. You remember when your universities didn't have mass notification? We're gonna send messages to people. We're gonna intrude upon their phones and leave them messages? That's so intrusive. Why would we do that? Text messages, they're gonna have to pay for our text messages we're sending them? Do we have to reimburse them? Do you remember that whole conversation? That was the third end of the world as we knew it, right? Today, anyone, I'm not gonna ask, anyone not have a mass notification system? Just think about it. Don't raise your hand if you don't, okay? Just put that out there. You gotta have it. Your ability to now pay attention to the digital conversation, in our opinion, is the next. And we've heard it. You're gonna look at social media, it's public. Doesn't matter if it's public, well, cameras are public, they can't, but those are cameras. This is social media, this is crazy. This is what we begin to think is the next duty of care. There's already one lawsuit pending in the United States at a university, referenced social media, and the lawsuit was filed under a Title IX complaint, and it said, given what is shared regularly on social media publicly at the institution, it should have known and or been aware of the hostile environment created under Title IX. That lawsuit is working its way through the federal courts right now. It's coming. I don't think we cannot not pay attention to this. Can you use a double negative like that? Did it work? It doesn't always work. I think you have to pay attention to this, right? I think that's what's coming down the pike. So how are schools using it? How are schools using threat alerts? And how are they paying attention to social media, public social media, threat identification? We're seeing schools do this not only for physical security related issues like I'm going to blow up the blah, 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 but part of their behavioral intervention systems. If you have a threat assessment team, a behavioral threat assessment team, you can't ignore, I'm going to should on you. It's not always good. I don't always should on people, but I think I have to should here. You should be paying attention to social media because the threats that are coming at you are being shared publicly. And I am relatively confident that if you pulled a case and said to me, here's a case we're working on right now, that we would find a social media link to someone involved in the case, whether it be the person, who's concerned about the threat to them or the person sharing the threat. It's happening now. So there's a threat of intervention. We've seen it being used to intervene in self-directed harm, where schools have said, but not for our ability to have caught that post, this student would likely be dead. Because we caught it and we saw it happening, we're able to intervene, right? We've seen it happen around gathering information, crowd sentiment. Michigan State, I had a great conversation with my good friend Jim Dunlap, the chief of police at Michigan State University. Big school, right? 55,000 students, big school. They had the Rolling Stones on campus. I don't know. I mean, I'm still of the mindset as a former university police chief that I'm the one guy on campus that didn't want anything to happen here. I was like, do we need a commencement ceremony? Can we mail them their certificates? I mean, do we have to actually put people in a closed space that can write? I was like, I was that guy. The Red Sox and the Yankees had the pennant. People were all excited, and I'm thinking, I was the only person in New England not excited about that game. Why? Because after the game, we had celebratory riots. They were burning things, flipping cars on campus, and I'm thinking, I got to deal with this, right? So he said to me, we had the Rolling Stones on campus, and I was like, my condolences, that's horrible. He goes, I know, it was, but he used his threat alert service to pay attention to all the things coming out of that stadium on social media, of which it is vast, and be able to look for problems. We were paying attention to the, and it's not university related per se, but many of you have come from schools with big stadiums or at least gathering spaces. And maybe Katy Perry was zipping along the Super Bowl on her jetpack, doing that kind of stuff. We were watching people tweeting and Instagramming, it's getting hot in here, it's getting hot in here, it's getting hot in here. This is not comfortable. What happens when people are in an enclosed space getting really hot and aggravated? Beer sales went up because they're drinking. And when beer sales go up, what happens next? Fights. I mean, that's why. So we were watching the trending of that particular challenge, right? Ongoing threats, corroborating post-ins. The most interesting use of social media threat alert service that I've, not interesting, but impressive in the creativity. One university used their service to input all of the relevant information for every Title IX complainant in order to protect that student online, to pay attention to people saying things about them online, which was, I thought, really impressive, you know, as to what that looked like. I thought it was a really, and then they put all of the respondents in to the system, because they were then doing the same thing, because as we know from our Title IX experience, you've got to pay equal attention to both, because we are, right, we're looking for the fact-finding, the neutral position, understand the facts. You got to do both. So we saw, and it goes on and on. These are just some of the ones Stephen and I have seen. We can keep adding. They go on and on and on. Let me show you some examples of things that have been found on social media. These are real examples, and, you know, in the interest of full disclosure, I'll say that because Social Sentinel is the leading, we pioneered this industry. So these are all examples from our service, from customers and universities and clients and K-12 school systems using us. Some of these photos, by the way, there's one in particular that I'm going to warn you is a little offensive, or potentially offensive. So I'll say that up front as we go through it. This is a guy that got on a plane, just to give you a sense of what's happening on social media. Sat down on the plane, took out his gun, put it in the seat pocket in front of him, and posted it on public social media. It happened. I swear this is real. The vice president of security and operations for Delta Airlines turned to me and said, "Is that a plant? Did you do that?" I said, "No, that's happening right now." Took 6 minutes. They figured out who he was, what flight he was on, and he had 6 brand new federal friends waiting for him when the plane landed in Atlanta. I'm sure that was a life-changing experience for him when he hit the ground, right? That's the way that went. Apparently, in the Midwest, this is how they do proms. This is true. It's true. We got a message from the chief of police in that community who said, in this wonderful Oklahoma accent, he said, "Gary, you know," he said, this is how we do proms." I said, well, as the father of a daughter, my first thought was, well, they're safe. I mean, you got to know those are going to mess them that way. The other part was they didn't actually go into the prom with that, did they, as the way that went? So we saw that get posted. This is at a university. This was a gang feud at a university. And the guy sat down on the toilet, pulled down his pink underwear, pulled out his Glock, and made this post as a threat against the other gang. We caught it for 2 reasons. 1, our racism filters caught it because he used the N-word. 2, our weapons filters caught it because he used the word Glock. And they were able to intervene. And I'd like to think, you know, we're able to intervene and stop something really bad from happening. But this was that was a university that got that one. Nothing says "Be My Valentine" to your sweetheart like a lot of marijuana. Apparently that was one that came out. This one is a pharmacist who is selling Adderall for $800 cash out the back of the pharmacy door. Chief of police in that community looked at that and said, "Is that real?" "Yeah, chief, it's happening right now. We just caught that like a second ago. It popped up." He was like, "Hang on a second." He calls his drug detectives and he goes, "You need to go down to the pharmacy on Main Street and talk to that guy." I mean, this stuff that's happening. University, more marijuana. And students, by the way, aren't saying, "Come buy marijuana at 2 p.m. tomorrow at my residence hall." I mean, nobody's that stupid as they do it. But they've got codes, and they're using code words, and if you listen well enough to the digital conversation, you figure out what those hashtags are. We had one school that had a posting, one university, "Mrs. H is in town at 55 Main Street tomorrow at whatever." The code being Mrs. H, heroin, the price, where it was located, the hashtag. The system, you have to be smart to know that's what the dialogue is, to know what you're seeing. This next one is interesting. The Kraft family and Gillette Stadium and the Patriots said to us, "Can you show us how your system works?" I said, "We can do that. We want opening day, we want to pay attention to what's going on social media." So here's what's important about how you think about this. If you paid attention to every post on social media that relates to your campus, you couldn't. There's too much. Tons of information being shared on social media. The challenge becomes, how do you get the right information? This one, we caught 40,000 social media hits in a 24-hour period related to Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, the Kraft family, Gillette Stadium, and the Patriots. The system found less than 0.5% of those that needed to pay attention. This one popped up. It said, everyone watching the game is about to hear a gunshot and witness an assassination as Tom Brady falls over dead. This is the kind of stuff people are sharing. The next photo I'm going to share with you came out of a university in the Pacific Northwest. This was posted by a university student, and it's an image, and this is going to go on. This is camera, right? Okay. Where's this being streamed?
All over the world.
There's 70 people connecting remotely right now.
But it's not going up on the internet.
No, it's not public.
Okay, thank you. That's what I need to know. This came from a university in the Pacific Northwest. What does that look like to you? Who's being what? Yep. Would it surprise you if I told you that that girl made that post? And I blocked out what she said because if I were her father, I'd have flown out to that university and she wouldn't be in school right now. My daughter ever posted something like that. It's the end. It's the beginning of a new life for my daughter, okay? We don't have, I can't make her a nun because I'm Jewish, but I'd find something we could do to kind of go that route, right? As it goes, right? That's real. That's the stuff that's getting posted. Is she at risk? She's so at risk. 64% of universities know they need to pay attention to social media for threats of safety and harm. This came out of the 2015 National Center, Margolis Healy / National Center survey. Margolis has been doing these surveys every year since 2009. Just published in the Chronicle, just picked up in USA Today. We looked at a whole bunch of things. You should get a copy of the full survey. It's interesting. It's got everything from emergency management to Title IX stuff. It's very interesting. We had a great turnout response rate in the survey. 64%, 2/3 of universities indicated that they know that social media is important for safety and security. 2/3 of those say that they're doing it manually. It's crazy. 1/3 said they were doing it in some form of automation, and when we asked how that was, what we got was manual searches at the social media sites. So go to Twitter and type in the search, which means they had to know all the words they were going to search for, and then do it manually as they went through it. Is that even possible today? This is, like cameras, access control, and mass notification, something I believe every school will need to look at in the coming 2-3 years, given the proliferation of what's going on in social media. So there are many stories that we can tell in anecdotes. I picked this one out of a high school student because it was very apropos, and it's the future of what you're getting in higher ed. This stuff's already happening in higher ed. This is a 15-year-old first-year student who's a popular athlete in school, right? Recently named homecoming prince, popular in general, right? Likable, happy, was suspended for school and the team for a fight. Now, those of you in student affairs and in judicial conduct would see the flags. You'd be asking what's changing, right? I mean, you're already asking those questions because you're thinking holistically on this, right? Doesn't seem to be much standing out here other than maybe he had a bad day and it didn't work very well. This is what he posted on Twitter. The question we have is that if you knew about this, would you have paid attention to him? Would you have reached out to say something to him? You're going to piss me off and then some shit's going to go down and I don't think you'll like it. You're not going to like what happens next. F it, might as well die now. That was being streamed from his Twitter account as he was moving through this angst. How many of you have had students at your institutions, again, not need to raise a hand, more rhetorical, that have posted photos of themselves on social media with weapons? How many of you live in states where hunting is a popular, right? Vermont, hunting season, everyone hunts, right? Virginia, everyone's hunting, right? I mean, this is where it's happening, right? And they're hunting with guns and things they've grown up with, and they're proud of, they've got their hunting rifle and their, orange cap on, and they're ready to go hunt. And they post it, and you might look at that, and some of you might say, well, that's just a picture of Gary with his hunting rifle because Gary hunts, and that's not a big deal. Or you might look at it and go, yeah, that's a problem, right? Like, what's the... So if this were on social media with hunting and such rifles, would it make a difference? This is what happened. Jalen Freiberg sent a text to several of his friends and 2 cousins saying to everyone, those people, can you meet me in the cafeteria? They came to the cafeteria, and at 10:39 a.m., he approached them, pulled out a weapon, and shot and killed them before killing himself. right? This was October 24, 2015. This is last year. This is a year ago, almost exactly, that this happened. Again, how much of it being shared on social media, the warning signs were there. Not being paid attention to, what do we miss? You didn't learn anything, I could blank shoot myself and you still won't learn anything, I'm over this. All real posts. So, what I want to do now, in having now raised the conversation for you, is open it up to questions and comments and thoughts. I mean, what are you seeing on your campuses with social media? What challenges are you having? How's it working or not working? What issues or concerns do you have as your campuses explore using social media for safety and security? And I'm not talking about paying attention to who likes hot dogs. Who likes hot dogs? It's that mic, I think. Who likes hot dogs at the ball game on campus? I'm talking about what do you think the challenges are? Where are your institutions? What are the concerns?
One of the concerns that I've been responsible for verbalizing here is the economic needs of the small private college. Is there a way that a consortium of small privates that are in the same geography can contract with Social Sentinel to get this service?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. It's a service that, whether or not it's us, and independent, well, I believe we're the best at this, independent, well, it's us, you can't not pay attention to that. Independent, whether it's us, you can't not pay attention to this. You know, so we're encouraging schools to start looking at this need as social media continues to grow. Students aren't using it less, they're using it more.
Thank you. Good morning. I think it's getting more and more difficult in our jobs to exercise restraint. The more information we have, the more terrible things we read about, the more difficult it is to understand statistics, and the more difficult it is to exercise restraint. So nobody wants to miss anything. No one wants to live with what they could have done when something horrible happens. And you can imagine with this voluminous flow of information and all the horrible things we read about, it gets harder and harder to hit the brakes. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts, or anyone in the room does, about how we combine this sort of vigilance with responsible exercise of restraint.
That's a great question. We have that conversation quite a bit. The way I've come to look at this, and then I would like to hear what others think about this. The way I've come to look at it is that you've already got systems in place to deal with concerning behavior. I know you all do. You've got threat assessment teams, you've got public safety functions. If I walked on campus, dropped a note that said a bomb's going off in the student center, you'd have systems to deal with that. If I came to you and said, you know, my buddy Gary is, you know, wearing camouflage to class every day, hasn't showered in 8 weeks, and, you know, is having ammunition shipped to the residence hall, you'd be like, got this, we know what we need to do with that. It's pretty straightforward with that stuff. So you know what you need to do. The question comes back to what's reasonable. So I'll go back to cameras. Do you catch, when we first put cameras on campuses, the concern was, we're not gonna catch it all. We can't get it all. Because what we know from the United Kingdom is, which has cameras like every 30 feet you're on camera, you only got about 30 minutes before a human being tunes out watching a bank of cameras. So are you going to miss things? Yes. What did we do? We implemented technology, which if you just had regular cameras on campus now, not smart cameras, again, you're behind the times. So it becomes what's reasonable. So with social media, you're not going to catch it all, and it's not designed, and you know, we in higher ed have this, it gets piled on, and then we feel like the pressure, we're never going to get it all, we're never going to be able to. And given the work that Stephen and I do in defending schools that are being sued and such, what you often hear us say in our testimony is, what's reasonable? Did you have reasonable methods to do X, Y, and Z? And just like video cameras that just run 24/7, just blind, dumb video cameras that are just going and going, then you've got to go through 30 hours, 80 hours, 700 hours to find something, have been replaced by video cameras that when the car drives, it activates, it gets the license plate, when it's, you know, all of that kind of stuff. For social media threat alerts, what we're seeing is technologies that just let you scan, put the word Gary in, and then you get 1 million hits that you got to cite. That's not useful. You're never going to use that. Services like ours that go in and say, if I see the word kill, with a noun or a name, that's probably escalated. If I see the word shoot with the word photo, that's probably not a threat. Take that off. You have to rely on systems that are smart about that, just like with your threat assessment processes. What we know is that if you have wide open filters for threat assessment intake on campus, you can't handle it. But if you crank down on the throttle on that to a point where it's too small, you miss all kinds of things. So you had to find kind of a middle ground. I think we're moving through that same space with this. Got to find the right information in the right way.
Gary, on Monday, in Peter Lake's comments, he talked a lot about First Amendment and kind of following up on Mike's point. People post a lot of things that aren't necessarily intended to transmit a threat. So how do you reach that balance between allowing people to exercise their First Amendment rights and say whatever they want to say, obviously within some constraints, versus determining whether what that person said is actually a threat either to themselves or to an institution or to whatever entity it might be that you're concerned about?
Great question. The way we've looked at that so far is that there have been court rulings that have indicated or that have shown that when you put it on social media, public social media, not private social media, public social media, when you put it up and it goes out into the world, you don't own it anymore. It's out there, you posted it, it's up and about and where it needs to go. What do we now tell students graduating, or actually we now telling students coming into college, careful what you put on social media because it can impact your job, right? Now we're seeing that, and we've been telling students that about, for several years now, because you're going to do something, you're going to go for your first job interview, and they're going to say, look, is that you? That kind of a thing. And so what we've seen is that there's this recognition that social media is posted publicly is public. That's the first part. Second part is there's no service available yet. And we haven't been able I can't take what collectively could be 1,000 years of higher ed experience in this room and distill it into a computer program that replaces you. You can't do that. So what these services have to be able to do is give you information so that you can assess whether it's a concern or not. You do that all the time. You do it all the time. Think about that threat assessment photo that comes to your threat assessment team of me on campus with my blaze orange and my rifle going hunting. So excited to go hunting, it's deer season, right? Of which, by the way, I have living in Vermont, loved hunting season because I got a lot of overtime as a cop during hunting season because I don't hunt. But my son now hunts, and I went through hunter safety with him, so I actually do have blaze orange. I'm not intending to go hunt, but I'm now fully able to hunt, I guess. You would look at that photo, and if you looked at that and did a quick, assessment and looked at who I am, you might arrive at the conclusion that guy's not a threat. That's just Gary's not the threat. But you did that. You chose that, and I believe that you, as the experts in campus, university, and college safety and security, student affairs, counseling, all the things you do, that multidisciplinary approach, have the ability to look at that. So it's not like you would tell your students, you can't post things about X, Y, and Z. What you would say is, we pay attention to that conversation, and we'll decide if there's a threat based on our experience, based on what you know is happening in the community. And so far, that's been well received, because it puts the expertise in your hands, not in anyone else's hands.
Gary, can you talk a little bit about how Social Sentinel specifically gives that information to a customer? You were talking about less than 10% is geolocated. So it sounds like it's heavily keyword associated. So how do you, knowing that 90% plus is not geolocated, how do you determine that it's within a certain geographic space that is interesting to your customer?
Great. This is the part of me that aspires to be a tech geek, where I get all excited, though I'm not a tech geek. I just like to be a geek. In particular, and this presentation was writ large about social media and that kind of stuff, so it's not so much a sales pitch, so I want to be careful about that, but I want to share with you kind of how we do that and what it looks like. So we built really robust algorithms that do a couple things. One, we have a library of thousands of keywords and phrases and behaviors built by folks like yourself, built by campus public safety officials, built by counseling center experts. We've gone and said, what are the 400 ways people talk about suicide and depression on social media? What are the 1,000 ways they talk about certain drugs or what that looks like? What are the ways they talk about disruption in gatherings? How do they do that? And we gathered all that information through hundreds of hours of research and expertise and created this database. And then we said, how do we know, how can we make our computer smart to know it knows when the word shoot and photo comes, or all that? Then we did all of that. And then we said, how do we move beyond a geolocation? How do we search the world for threats against the institution and people? So for example, the University of Vermont is a Social Sentinel customer. They can run filters worldwide that have keywords related to UVM, Catamounts, Gutterson Fieldhouse, whatever they put in, against all of that library we built to be able to return a result. The post that you saw about Tom Brady going to be shot and assassinated, for all we know, he wasn't at Gillette Stadium because that wasn't geolocated. That guy lived in Florida. I don't know if he was in Florida or Gillette, but we know who the guy was, because he posted it publicly. So services that only focus on a geolocation, it's not going to give you all that you need. You need something that goes beyond that, just because of that volume and that lack of geolocating. If you go with a service that doesn't know how to do that right, you get inundated, and then you won't use it, because then it's just too much. You're like, and when the system hits those alerts, you get to decide how you want to hear it. Some people get, like our suicide and depression filters, you might get a text message, and the counseling center might get a text message, but for the protests and general whatever, you may get a daily PDF. You get to decide how that gets to you and kind of where that goes. You have to, because if it doesn't fit into your workflow, you're not going to use it either. So any service you go with has to fit into your workflow. It used to drive me nuts when I was I'll give you the prime example. Anyone lived through a PeopleSoft transition? Nothing against PeopleSoft, great company, do great work, blah, blah, blah. But if you lived through that transition, you know how painful that was, because you had to change everything you did to fit the software, right? That, and for good reason or not, I don't know. But for this, it was all about how does it work in your workflow.
There are actually more people who didn't live through it.
Who didn't? Who did, yeah, exactly.
They didn't make it out to the other side.
No, they didn't.
I have two questions. The first is, how do you keep up with the ever-changing lexicon of keywords? I mean, there are words out there that are meaningless to me, but have meaning to people in the 18 to 22-year-old
Great
age
question.
range.
We, because I know that I'm not, as much as I'd like to be an 18 to 20, actually I wouldn't like to be an 18 to 22-year-old again. I'm happy right where I am as it goes, right? In our case, we hired, we've got 5 interns from Clemson University's Social Media Research Lab, and their job is to pay, anyone from Clemson? Oh, I gotta get back to the mic. Anyone? We love Clemson. Their job for us, amongst our other experts that are in our research unit that look at key, is to pay attention to what's trending language on college campuses, and in high school, because it's changing so fast. The only way we knew to figure out how to do that was to go get college students, right? And it's great because those college students, at the end of their internship and graduation, will hopefully transition into working for us. It's also our ability to, bring them into the fold, so to speak.
Okay. My second question is that there's an old expression that many hands make small work, and I suppose in the social media world, you can tweak that a little bit to say that many eyes make small work or many ears make small work. So I'm wondering, what, if anything, do you do to combine your strategies with bystander intervention strategies?
They have to be combined. You'll hear Stephen and I often say there's no one Uber solution for campus safety and security. We all know that. So this is about the overall strategy. So do you have a physical security infrastructure? You're all going to say yes. You probably got the alligators and the moats and all the things you need to do with that. And then do you have the systems in place to deal with Title IX and behavioral threat? You're all going to say yes, we do. Of course we do. This is very important to us. You've got that. And now you're going to add the ability to pay attention to the digital conversation, because you're missing most of the conversation if you're not, because that's where it's happening. So it becomes a part of your overall strategy, and every school fits it in a little differently, right? Everyone puts it a little different place depending on their culture, because as we hear all the time, every school is unique. And yet every school is the same, right? I mean, it's kind of the way that plays out. So you find a way to plug this into the right spot.
We've been talking a lot about, I think, text-based search, but you talked about image kind of being the way things are going, and also video. Can you talk about, I guess generally, and in terms of Social Sentinel, searching through images with maybe just an innocuous statement attached, or audio files attached to a video, and how you can, search through that?
It started with high school principals and superintendents calling me and saying, in the high school space around suicide and depression, and in colleges, I got to make sure I link that because I've seen it trending there. A lot of photos on Instagram and Twitter of cutting. Students that have cut themselves and posted it. So we began building image recognition around that, around cutting, around that piece of it. And then we began looking to tie into Google's network and their images database they've created. And then we formed a partnership with the Internet Watch Foundation out of London, England, which is the world's leading experts on sexual abuse, child molestation, and their image database. So we're moving our service to include being able to look at images, because it's not just, and I'll give you an example. The reason we caught that guy that had the gun on the toilet is because he posted language that we triggered on. At some point down the road, and I never give a definitive time or date because then my tech people want to strangle me, our system will recognize that's an image of a gun. And that's what will trigger it, as well as the words. That's all in process now. It has to, because if we're migrating from text-based to video and audio, we've just started to include video in the last 6 months in our system. So now when you get an alert, it alerts on a video, it alerts on the keywords around it. You can actually watch the video on your handheld and see what it is that got alerted. So we're moving in that direction. We have to. It's where it's going.
I'm going to, I want to do some background here, and then I'm going to ask you a specific question.
Hit me.
The background is, we're all academics, and so there's a certain amount of sensitivity to what Gary described as privacy. Agreed? But what we're talking about here are things that people put on the front page of the New York Times. They take an ad in the New York Times, and then when you open the paper, there it is. That's how I've come to think about this. It's not private at all. It's very much public. So that being said, the next problem I'm wrestling with in my head is how much money can we put aside to do all of this community protection work that takes the money out of the classroom, the faculty, and the learning materials? It's a balancing act that we all play with all the time. And that leads me here, Gary. You've held this, you've done a 30,000-foot thing for us. And frankly, I never heard of this before. I've wondered how I could do this, and the answer was manually, which is okay. So how about we talk about the economics of this? Are you able in this forum to talk about the cost? Because I'm leaving here, this may be the most significant thing I've come up with at this conference. I have a student body of 7,000 kids, a staff of about 1,700. I'm an urban campus. I have homicides going on around me all the time. I have by the way, I'm a highly technology university. I didn't used to have students, it's RPI. I didn't used to have students with mental illness on my campus. And now I have students who have all kinds of disabilities and are perfectly capable of being successful because of medication. But my incident rate of the things that Gary's talking about have skyrocketed 500% in the last 15 years. So I'm looking for things that prevent disasters. So what's the economics of this?
So the way I often think about that to start is, what's the economics of not doing this? Given what we're seeing, schools are paying in litigation, it's crazy. Different services do it differently. I took a very simplistic approach. I like to think that I'm probably more of a simple thinker than I would like to be simpler than I am in many ways. But So for our particular service, it's a flat fee of $15,000 a year for unlimited searches, unlimited users, unlimited. And schools that use us give, their counseling centers a login, the police have a login, student affairs has a login. They'll share it with whoever needs to share it on campus. Some services charge you by the user, some charge you by the search, some charge you by the amount of social media they gather for your campus. I didn't want to do any of that. I wanted the simplest way to make sure you used it, right? So at the end of the day, we picked a price that we knew and tested in the market that we knew was going to adopt, because it's a third of the price of it's a digital police officer running 24/7. It's a third of the price of what you'd pay for staff. There's no benefits, you're not paying on it, right? It's relatively simple. You flip it on and it works. Is it okay if I sit? Okay, thanks. I got a mic over here too, so I don't have to get that one. Perfect.
So I know we started moving the conversation into the picture and video based, but as most of us know, the wonderful world of Snapchat, I think it's actually really comical sometimes because our students really believe that one goes away. So
Nothing goes away.
exactly, but for some reason that's the one that they think. And I think we're starting to see a trend in our campus of our students are allowing people to kind of follow them as well, that they're not paying attention. They're putting their stories up, the ones that stay 24 hours, and they still think, oh, well, you can't get them, and students video them, video to video on phone. So that's how they come into our student conduct office a lot. But that's a kind of a private piece. There's no fully public, I guess, forum for Snapchat, and I just didn't know if there was anything in the works from your thoughts in your world of this, or what you guys are doing to even think, because a lot of our students are sharing real-time information, kind of like what you're getting at in a couple of these other things, but this is where I am, this is what's going on, here's all the drinking, the partying, the drugs, the everything. I just didn't know.
Yeah, Snapchat's another interesting service for all the reasons you've mentioned. It doesn't allow companies like ours to be able to pay attention to it. They don't share that information. What we found, though, is that what we've seen is Snapchat shows up in our feeds because Twitter and Instagram are so popular. Someone will capture a Snapchat, like you said, they'll capture it on their device, and they'll repost it on Twitter or Instagram, and then we'll catch it. So it doesn't come directly through that service. And even in the last years, and I'll be curious to see what spring of 2016 looks like, but the 2015 year analysis done by Piper Jaffray and what I put up there had Snapchat for college, it's like way over here. So I'm waiting to see, does it grow? It's not that big, it's just not that big yet. We don't know how to get that information. And companies that would say to you, well, we have that, are not getting that information legally from Snapchat. They're scraping the technology, which is a violation of terms of use. And then that puts you at risk of violating. It's just not good. You don't want to go with a company that's scraping information illegally, because then it doesn't give you protection. It doesn't play well. Other thoughts?
You had mentioned earlier a duty of care to the university, or of the university to the community, and I'm wondering, understanding that that's still in the court system and still evolving, I'm wondering if you can speak a bit more to that.
And let me go to the most recent. So let's look at both Umpqua and Philadelphia area colleges, and then Chuck, being the long-standing legal beagle that he is, will hopefully weigh in on parts of this. What we saw there was a recognition that this stuff is being forecasted on social media. So the question that's being asked is, do schools then have an obligation to pay attention to it if that's where it's being discussed? And I'm not a Supreme Court justice. I'm not an attorney. I don't play one on television. The work that we do with counsel through expert witness work continues to inform us, or at least have us believe that as the access to the technology to pay attention to these things gets affordable, gets easy, gets just like cameras. In the beginning, cameras were expensive. To put cameras on your campus when they first came out was a ton of money. Now, you can go to Best Buy for your home, buy 4 IP cameras, Velcro them to the wall, flip it on the network, and you're online looking at your house, right? It's that easy to do. Schools now, again, if they're not having cameras and bad things happen, the argument from plaintiff's counsel is often, who doesn't have cameras? Like, where's your... I think this is trending in that direction. As it gets easier to use, as it's more cost-effective, who's going to argue? You know, I had one parent from one of the Philadelphia area schools that I know called me in the midst of what's happening out there and said, they need to be paying attention to blah, blah, blah. I said, well, they are. They need to be da-da-da, but they're all very competent schools. They're doing good work. Are they paying attention to social media? I don't know. They should be. I'll pay for it. Give it to them. I'm like, interesting. That's what I had a parent say. I'll write the check to you. Give it to them. Not that easy. But what I heard the parents say behind that was, it's not that, it's worth it. Like, why wouldn't you do it? I think as we start seeing more and more trending forward around the ease of the use of the technology, the cost effectiveness, we're going to end up in a spot where folks like Chuck are going to be legally looking at, this now becomes a duty of care. Like, how do we not do it and justify it? Like today, how could you possibly say that you don't have a mass notification system after Virginia Tech? You couldn't. You'd get hung out to dry on that. I think we're in the same boat. I think that's what's coming anyway.
Let me do a quick overview so that those of you who are not lawyers know what we're talking about. Our responsibilities in our society, other than the criminal law, which is statutory and is set by our legislatures, okay? There are two kinds of law, the criminal law and then everything else, which is called the civil law. Some of you heard me say yesterday that a small subjunct of the civil law is administrative law. But we're now talking about the civil law. That governs our responsibilities to each other. To whom we're responsible and at what level is set by judges and juries, set by people like you and I. That's how it happens. It happens differently in each of the 50 states. So the responsibilities of people to each other in the state of Vermont are not the same as in the state of New York, even though we're next door to each other. Now, that being said, to whom you have a duty is a relationship issue, but it's a pillar of this responsibility issue. I don't have a duty to you. You're not paying me. There's no relationship here. The University of Vermont has a duty to you to make this facility safe for your use because they invited you here and you paid them to come. So you see the duty thing? The next part of this is the standard of care. To what level does the University of Vermont owe you a duty? If the University of Vermont gets hit by some crazy tropical storm right now, do they have a duty to you to protect you from that storm? The answer is no. Do they have a duty to you to keep the staircase dry? The answer is yes, because juries expect staircases not to be slippery, and they're public about that. That's called a standard of care. And the third pillar is foreseeability. If the staircase is wet, is it foreseeable that you're going to fall? The answer is yes. It's foreseeable you're going to fall. At that point, we're talking about how much at that point, okay? Gary's point is exactly that. As this trend line builds, then juries are going to take the position that it's expected that certainly a large university system would have a technique for monitoring known hazards on its campus because the injury is foreseeable. This software is the latest advance in that kind of thing. What you're going to see, by the way, here's a game you can play with yourself. In the academic scientific community, we are learning about concussions. We didn't know anything about concussions. We're now learning. The research is being done, among other places, at BU. As we learn more about concussions, my prediction 104, you heard it here first, is the insurance companies will refuse to insure high school football. Just won't insure it. Because it's too foreseeable that a kid who has this happening on a regular basis is going to have a concussion. and therefore, I'm not going to pay the freight when a jury says you should have known. Is that helpful? How was that, Gary?
Chuck, perfect. Great law professor. I'm not a shill, by the way. No, not at all.
So I had a question in terms of people who have, universities who have used this product. What's the general approach in terms of letting students know that they have this? Is it full disclosure? Is it we don't tell you at all even when we confront you because we have this tweet from you? We're not going to tell you how we got this tweet. Where do the universities fall on that?
I've seen it done every way you could think of. I could think of one university that didn't, other than the administration that knew, didn't tell anyone, and they haven't still. I have another university that the police chief met with student affairs and the president of the student government and got their support, and that did that. And I've got another university as an example that was very open about it. We care about you, we think this is important. There's a lot of challenges around suicide, depression, and issues, and so we're employing this new service to help protect the campus, and went that route. So I've seen it go. It's the culture of your institutions is what I've tended to see, which guided that. In every case, I've not experienced any of our customers having blowback on this. Once, which is important. Let me add one other thing to that. How we helped avoid that problem is, and this is unique to us, you're only allowed to use our service for safety and security. You can't use it to tell who likes the sound quality in the Davis Center, who likes what. You can't. We don't allow you to do it because that's a little creepy to people. Wait a minute, you're paying attention to, if we like the new carpeting in the residence hall, you're paying attention. No, we're only paying attention if you're trying to hurt yourself or someone else, or if you're trying to do something that can hurt the campus. That seems to be a lot more palatable because our students have come up in an age where, and again, I go back to years ago when we did one of our first Margolis Healy surveys, we talked to students about cameras. And we had one student say to me, he goes, Gary, I don't care if the university has cameras up. He goes, I got one in my pocket. I take pictures of this thing all the time. I go everywhere I go, I'm shooting pictures of it. It became like, oh, there's one on the wall. I got one in my pocket. I get better shots than this than you do on that, right? So we're thinking that, the trending is, well, of course you pay attention to social media because that's where we are. We're talking on it all the time. It's a different, generation's different. The acceptability of this seems to be different. The biggest concerns we've heard, which have been ameliorated, have been from faculty and staff, and mostly faculty, not even staff. It's not even, it's talking about the principle of academic freedom and what you're bonding, what I'm saying, what you'd expect, to be a good conversation to have. So that's kind of where that's trending.
I agree with you as far as technology. Years ago, you would throw more people to the problems. Now we're looking at efficiencies. And I can remember when you put more people on the police force, or maybe we're going to increase surveillance, because surveillance really doesn't have a fringe package that comes with it.
Right.
The other thing over time that's come out is that it's cut back on the investigation time. Now we know how long that student went into that dorm room, and now how much time. So now it helps out in that respect. But I believe once decisions are made, because a lot of things come down to finance right now, when it raises to the occasion, what is the return on investment? And once the return on investment, you start looking at it, say a budget committee or some type of finance committee, then all of a sudden the decision is actually made pretty easy. It's not that difficult. But more and more, it's all about efficiencies and ROI.
I don't think we have much of a choice not to do it that way.
Yeah, and I want to plug some numbers in here for you, because that's an important concept. When you think of public safety, and when you're thinking of this, it's beyond public safety, but when you think of public safety, one position is 4.3 people, because we're talking like nursing, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365, okay? So one position of, let's pluck a number out of nowhere, $30,000 plus a 30% fringe package, okay? Times 4.3. That's what it costs. I would suggest to you, if you measure it against the cost of your health center, and the big folks in this room have a physician, have a psychiatrist, have physician's assistants, and have clinical psychologists. Those numbers are very high. It's not 4.3, it's 1, maybe 1.5, but those numbers are very high. What if you could scale down the caseload? What if you could scale down the incident rate? And that's what we're talking about here.
We had a school, and I'll give this comment, and Stephen want to comment, share the story. We had a school, a school district in Massachusetts. Matter of fact, I had dinner with the superintendent last night here in Burlington. He came up to see me. We had a dinner with a school system in Massachusetts, and this is the call I got from him about 6 or 8 months ago. 3 school districts, his and 2 others, suicide pact between the 3 school districts. A number of high school students were going to kill themselves at the same time. They'd already worked it out. One of them was tweeting that from within the district where, that's our client, and they caught it. And the superintendent called me, and he was almost in tears, and he said to me, we intervened, nobody died, we caught it before they did it, we got the stream of text, we only caught it because we had a tool that allowed us to do that. He said to me, you've paid for yourself 1,000 times over, and you will now be here for as long as I'm the superintendent for that ROI. Because what he said, I've had universities, police chiefs call me and say, we caught X, Y, and Z happening. It's worth its weight. I mean, UVM had one that I still brag about. They had, there was a party that was going to happen on the quad, and one of the students in the Redstone was posting, grab your couches and come outside. So they were all carrying their couches out to set up around for this party. And UVM police caught that on an alert. They caught it from their system. And there was a UVM police officer waiting at the bottom of the stairs as these guys were bringing down a couple of couches and just said, you know, and they said, oh, how did you know it? I said, well, you put it on, you tweeted that. I mean, like, what, you don't think the whole world saw that? And then up they back go with the couches, right? I mean, averting whatever problem they were going to have. The stories like that are just constant, you know, with the ability to get the kind of ROI that they need.
Yeah, but you know the magic of this? This is, the reason I'm jumping in here, this has been bothering me as an attorney with 40 years experience in higher ed at campuses all over the country. How do I get ahead of the curve has always been bothering me. It just bothers me. The thing I like about this is that there's a human in control of what you do with the information. I really like that. And I'll give you an anecdote to support it. For some reason, April 20th of every year is, it's some marijuana day or something. I don't know what it is. So there's a day, okay. 4/20/20 something? Yeah, right. Anyway, we noticed, those of us in crisis management, okay, yeah, right. Those of us in crisis management noticed that there was a trend for bad things to be scheduled to happen on 4/20. And so we started paying attention to that, and we managed to get a little bit ahead of that. I discovered on my campus, my very conservative science technology group of kids, that they have a little pot party in the middle of one of the quads on 4/20, at 4/20, on 4/20, at 4/20. That's right. Well, anyway, okay. So, you know, I called my public safety team together and I said, we're not going to be there on 4/20, at 4/20. We're going to arrive at 4:25. Okay? So 200 kids gather. There's a puff of smoke. At 4:25, the public safety vehicles show up. The kids laugh and go home. Because a human is in charge. Somebody made a judgment that I don't need to arrest 200 kids for having a cigarette in the middle of my campus.
Thank goodness we never had that problem at UVM.
Never. I never remember that happening at all.
You still have nightmares about that, don't you? Yes, you do.
Yes. So I have 2 questions. One, I'm actually going to push back on this might lower the work. Certainly around incidents like, you know, large gatherings, parties, things like that, absolutely we can get ahead of it. But our recent experience in the Title IX space, where more attention, more information has, in a place that's difficult and sensitive and all that, has only given rise to tremendously more work. And so as I think about, particularly in the student safety, self-harm kind of space that all of this information might give to us, that's going to require tremendously more resources, because now we know about it and we can barely keep up with what we know, not tracking this effectively. So any willingness to speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. What's driven us to give you the best information is that very issue. We knew that if a service like ours gave you too much information, you'd have that kind of like, I can't, this is too much, it's overwhelming, and you'd shut down. We also knew that, that you have existing systems to handle the information. We knew that if we gave you the right information at the right time, that you had the capacity to flow through this and to deal with it. Just like if I left a handwritten note on the hall advisor's desk, or just like if something came in through a faculty member, you've already got the antenna out to funnel it and do something with it. We knew that we had to work really hard, that when a threat showed up on social media, it had to be as real as it could be for you to care about it and eliminate as many of the false positives as necessary. And so that's been it's going to be, I don't think we'll ever stop driving to that, because we knew that if you felt overwhelmed, it's too much, because they're ultimately human beings dealing with the onslaught. Right now, Title IX it's a good example. You know, schools are getting really pounded on, and the pressure is tremendous. And we don't yet know where it's going to even out. You know, when do we find the equilibrium? So we're trying to make sure we're of value during that and not creating more of your problems. Because if we create your problems, you don't want us. I mean, it's not going to help.
Sure, and you wouldn't be creating the problems, but you would be uncovering them in a way, many of us are already at capacity with what we already know. So it's not that we don't have the intellectual capacity, it's not that we don't know how to respond, there's just not enough bodies often to respond to what we already have. And so once we get additional information, that invokes the duty to care, and the standard of care is high, and the expectations of response, again, I'm going to go back to our Title IX experience, the expectations of how and in what ways we respond and how we document, and it's never ending. And so I just see the number of heads needed to respond to this going up tremendously.
And Julie, what I've seen, and I'll go back to Chuck's comments. What I've seen, why did it keep turning off? How does that work? When I going back to what Chuck's comments were before, is that juries and Chuck, correct me on this if I'm wrong, juries and adjudicators don't ever take into account whether there's capacity for the university to handle it. They frankly don't seem to care. They never seem to care. What they do care about is that something's done. So we don't seem to be getting a pass on, well, we've got a lot to do and this is one more thing we have to do, so therefore it's just not happening. And so companies like mine, like ours, are focused on making your life easier, not more difficult. That was the conversation I had with the head of security for the Patriots. He said, if you make my life easier, it makes me very happy. If you make my life more complex, I don't need you. I got enough complexity, right? I think that's what's happening now. I think that's where this is going. You're going to have to do something with it. I don't think we get a choice.
My question actually it was almost the same question that you had. And I've heard people say, and obviously I'm associated with this company, so I just want to be clear about this. This is not a setup question, by the way. This is actually probably going to make him very upset. So what about folks who say, I'm at capacity already, I got Title IX, I got threat assessment, I got all this other stuff happening. What if I just ignore it? I'm just going to ignore it. I'm just not going to pay attention to it. And not maybe it'll go away, but you're not placing that addition, you're not accepting, and this is for Chuck too, you're not accepting that additional burden now of having to make decisions about, I don't know, how many alerts a person gets in, or an institution may get in a day, 20, 30, I don't know.
5, 10, depends on what they're doing.
5, okay,
right.
all right. So can you
Whatever
guys
that
kind of
is.
speak to, both of you all can kind of speak to, what if I just say, yeah, I'm not ready to deal with this, I'm just going to ignore it.
So what I've seen, and I'll throw it back to kind of co-opt you into this conversation, what you and I have seen traveling the country now working with schools is that things happen, and some schools adopt early and adjust, some schools wait a little bit, some schools are laggards on the back end. It's human nature. It depends on who they are. And so we'll see the same thing here. There are some schools that'll adopt quick for whatever reason, their DNA, their culture, their capacity, whatever that is. Some schools will wait, but eventually everyone will have to do it. And it goes the same thing with some of you had mass notification systems before Virginia Tech. Some of you did. Some of you took 2-3 years after Virginia Tech before you finally got your mass notification system. And we'd scratch our heads going, how come it took so long? It just did. Some of you had behavioral threat assessment teams 20 years ago in some form. Some of you, it took an extra year or an extra, whatever that was. So what I think is going to happen is that same adoption curve. It'll go with the flow, but eventually you'll all have it because it'll become a standard of care. You just can't not pay attention to where your students are. It goes back to schools. Kids in elementary school, my kids would go out for recess, they'd be in the yard. Who was out with them? A teacher. Why? Because this principal said to me, we always put a teacher out in the schoolyard. The digital it's our playground monitor. I said, so who's paying attention to the kids when they're online? And at first was, well, our kids aren't online during school. I said, really? They're not? You want me to show you what I get during the school day from my kids in text messages alone, right? And then it became a recognition that you needed that digital playground monitor, you need that digital security officer, police officer. It's gonna happen. You're gonna have it. It's just a matter of when in the life cycle you do it, in my opinion. So we were out of time. Chuck, I'll pass it to you. And I'll stick around for a few minutes. And I have, for anyone who's interested, I do have a packet information that you can take if you're curious about more about it. So.
I just want to thank Gary for an excellent presentation, and thank all of you for being here with us to share this. Thanks very much.